All of you are here, of course, for today's presentation. So we're going to go ahead and get to the presentation. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Brian Passaro. Brian is a senior research associate here at Qatar. We actually managed to lure him away from the Florida DOT, where he worked for 7 years at both the district and headquarters level. Prior to that, he was a transportation planner for 3.5 years at the San Diego Association of Governments. Brian is a graduate of Virginia Tech and the University of Florida and holds a master's in urban and regional planning. One of his areas of research expertise is urban partnership agreements, which is what he'll be talking about today. So, Brian, go ahead and please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Jen, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in during, tuning in during your lunch hour. I'll try and keep things interesting for you, even as I tend to a scratchy throat. So bear with me. I'm getting over a cold here, but let's go ahead and get started. Today, of course, I'm going to be talking about what's called the Urban Partnership Agreement Program, and specifically the transit improvements that were funded through this program. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, the Urban Partnership Agreement and its companion program, the Congestion Reduction Demonstration, is a congestion relief program sponsored by U.S. DOT to the tune of $1.3 billion. In December 2006, U.S. DOT sought applications from cities for congestion reduction strategies that included what they referred to as the 4 T's. And these were tolling, transit, telecommuting, and technology. And they gave awards to 6 cities. These included, let me see here, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Atlanta, and Miami. I'm going to talk a little bit first about what each one of these areas is doing. Let's start off with Miami. That's the project that's been in operation the longest. The Miami UPA involved an HOV to HOT conversion on Interstate 95. They did it in 3 phases. Phase 1A, which you see in yellow on the map, was opened first. That opened in December 2008, and that opened express lanes in the northbound direction from downtown Miami to the Golden Glades interchange. After that, Phase 1B, which is shown in orange, opened up in January 2010, and that opened express lanes in the southbound direction. That's what's in existence today. The next phase, Phase 2, is going to start construction. The latest I heard, it'll start construction at the end of this year, and it's scheduled to open in mid-2014. That'll extend the express lanes up into Broward County, slightly north of I-595. It's 2 HOT lanes in each direction. They're separated from the general purpose traffic by plastic poles. Currently, the only way you can access the express lanes is at the endpoints. The tolls are priced dynamically, meaning they fluctuate based on traffic conditions within the express lanes. They can range from 25 cents to $3.50, although they could go up to $7 under extreme conditions. Registered van pools, registered 3+ carpools, and hybrid vehicles can use the lanes without paying a toll. Now, the Miami UPA included funding for transit improvements. During Phase 1, 3 new routes were added. On the map you see here, the orange dotted line, that is the original Route 95X that preceded the project. And then during Phase 1, 3 additional routes were added, which you see in the various shades of green and purple. There's actually a 4th route that's gone in recently in the Miramar area around here. The UPA project also included funding to add 500 spaces at the Golden Glades Park and Ride lot, which is in this area. And it also included transit signal priority added to 2 arterials in Broward County where the 95 Express bus operates. That's represented by the green arrows on your map. Those 2 arterials were Hollywood Pines Boulevard and Broward Boulevard. Next is Minneapolis. Their UPA project is on Interstate 35 West. It involves both a HOV to HOT conversion, which was this southern segment right here. That was an HOV lane. They converted it to an HOT lane. And it also included the addition of new HOT lanes here in the mid segment and then also in this northern segment. The northern segment, which I'll describe it a little bit more detail later, they refer to as the Price Dynamic Shoulder Lanes, or PDSL. For their project, the lanes are, it's one hot lane per direction, except for the PDSL. That is northbound only. The lanes are stripe separated from the general purpose lanes. Like Miami, it has dynamic pricing, but unlike Miami, it has multiple entry-exit points. 2+ carpools are allowed to use it for free, and during off-peak hours, these lanes, with the exception of the PDSL, are open to general traffic. In Minnesota, the transit improvements included added bus service on Interstate 35, 6 new or expanded park and ride lots. A picture of one of the park and ride lots was actually also a BRT station that was added. You see that in the picture on the right at Apple Valley. A transit bypass lane. It also included contraflow bus-only lanes in downtown, and that's the picture you see in the bottom right. The bus-only lanes in downtown Minneapolis, called the Mark II lanes. And it also included ITS technology. Specifically, what it included was real-time travel times on Interstate 35, next bus arrival signs in downtown, and what's called a driver assist system for buses that operate on Cedar Avenue. In Atlanta, they're also doing an HOV to HOT conversion. Theirs is going to open this summer in August. It's going to be one hot lane per direction with stripe separation, also dynamic pricing. And for theirs, it'll be 3+ carpools that can use it for free. Their transit improvements include 36 additional buses for 5 new express routes on Interstate 85, and it also includes funding for 3 new and 1 expanded park and ride lot. Seattle has one of the more robust projects in the group. In their case, it's the State Road 520 floating bridge. They're tolling it for 2 reasons. One is congestion relief, but they're also tolling it to raise revenues to replace the bridge. And as a result, all of the lanes across the bridge will be tolled. Only transit will be able to go across the bridge for free. So it'll be 2 hot lanes per direction. And unlike the other projects I've mentioned so far, their pricing is not going to be dynamic. They're going to be using time-of-day pricing. The transit improvements for Seattle include 43 additional buses. The vast majority of it is for service across State Road 520. The UPA-funded transit service is already in place. That started in February. The tolling will not start until later. I think the latest I've heard is July, but that may get pushed back. Other transit improvements include 2 park and ride lots, one here in the South Kirkland area and one in the Redmond area. It also includes the installation of real-time bus arrival signs on both sides of State Road 520. In Los Angeles, their project involves both Interstate 10 and Interstate I-10. This is going to be an HOV to HOT conversion. Specifically, what they're doing is they're converting the Harbor Transit Way on Interstate 110 and the El Monte Busway on Interstate 10 to HOT lanes. There's some slight variations between the two. On the Harbor Transit Way, they're going to begin tolling on that one first in October of 2012. It'll be 1 lane per direction, and 2+ carpools can use it for free. On Interstate 10, the El Monte, the tolls won't begin until February of 2013. That'll be 2 lanes per direction, and the requirement to ride those lanes for free will be 3+ carpools. And they plan to use dynamic pricing. The transit improvements for LA include 59 additional buses. The vast majority of those are going to go to Metro Transit's Silver Line Bus Rapid Transit. This BRT operates on both I-10 and I-110. And what these additional buses will do is it's going to allow them to do 10-minute headways in the peak on both of these corridors. From what I recall, it has 10-minute headways on Interstate 10, so these new buses will allow 10-minute headways on Interstate 110 as well. The LA project also includes transit signal priority. They're going to be equipping 15 intersections in downtown LA on Figueroa and Flower Streets with TSP. That's what you see in the map in the lower right. The project also includes funding for a new 30-bay bus terminal at the El Monte Transit Center, security improvements for all the stations along the Harbor Transit Way. They're also going to be relocating the boarding and a lighting area at the beginning of the, or I guess the end point of the El Monte busway in downtown so that there's direct pedestrian access between the El Monte and Union Station. And finally, the LA project includes improvements at Pomona Metrolink station, specifically adding 143 extra parking spaces and extending the boarding platforms for longer trains. Now, even though there's variations between the different project locations, there's three common transit hypotheses and one question that are being evaluated. The first hypothesis is that the UPA will enhance transit performance on the UPA corridors. What we mean by performance are things like on-time performance and bus running times and speeds. The second hypothesis is that the UPA project will increase ridership and facilitate a mode shift to transit, namely that some drivers in the corridor, when given an option, will opt for transit. The third hypothesis is that the transit mode shift and increased ridership will contribute to congestion mitigation. And then the fourth hypothesis is really a question, is what is the contribution of each UPA project or element to increase ridership and a mode shift to transit? For example, in Minneapolis, two of the project elements were real-time travel signs along Interstate 35 and next bus arrival signs in downtown. So the evaluation is going to look at how much these projects contributed to increased ridership. So what does the data show so far? Miami and Minneapolis are the two operational UPA projects to date. I'll start with Miami. In the slides that follow, I'm going to be comparing 2008 pre-deployment data to 2010 post-deployment data. Also, the figures that I'll be showing, unless otherwise noted, are combined figures for all four I-95 express bus routes. Remember, there was the original Route 95X, and then there was the three additional routes that were added during Phase 1. In regards to the first hypothesis, transit performance, the results were very positive. Average travel times in the express lanes improved from 25 to 8 minutes. Speeds went up from 18 to 57 miles per hour. And as a result of these improvements, Miami-Dade Transit was able to make changes in scheduled travel times for the buses. They were able to shave 10 minutes off the schedule for the northbound direction and 7 minutes from the southbound direction. On-time performance went up as well, went from 76 to 81%. With the TSP, we did an evaluation of what the impacts were of TSP on Pines Boulevard, and we discovered that in the AM, the bus travel times were reduced by 12% with the TSP turned on. In regards to transit ridership and mode shift to transit, the results are mixed. Combined ridership on all of the 95 express buses increased 57%. However, boardings per revenue mile dropped 14%. And the reason for the drop is that the three new routes that were added into Broward County more than doubled the amount of revenue miles for the 95 express bus service. However, at the time of the data collection, those three routes were still fairly new and ridership had not yet matured. Though it's not shown on the slide, boardings per revenue mile for just the original 95X, though, increased 51% between 2008 and 2010. Average vehicle per occupancy and transit mode share both dropped, and the reason why they dropped, it has a common explanation, and that is the influx of toll-paying customers into the express lanes. Simply put, the transit ridership increases were diminished by the larger volumes of toll-paying single-occupant vehicles. Now, before I move on to the third hypothesis, I want to share an observation about the increase in transit ridership. During the course of the evaluation, unemployment in Miami-Dade County rose steadily from 4.9% in January of 2008 to 11.4% in April of 2010. That's a 123% increase. This slide overlays the unemployment rate, which is shown in red, with system-wide bus ridership for Miami-Dade Transit, shown in blue. And you can clearly see how the unemployment line was going up, ridership was going down. But if you take that same slide and now compare it to just ridership for the 95 Express bus service, that is to say those 4 routes, you see that ridership increased in spite of rising unemployment. Now granted, some of this increase was due to the addition of the 3 new routes in January of 2010. But on the original 95X alone, and it's not shown on this chart, but just on the original 95X alone, there was still a 13% increase in ridership from 2008 to 2010. The third hypothesis was that the increase in transit ridership and the mode shift to transit would lead to reduced congestion. The way this was measured was by person throughput. That is, the number of people transported through the corridor as opposed to vehicles. Between 2008 and 2010, there was a 42% increase in person throughput in the express lanes. Now, the majority of this came from 2 things. One was the adding of the second hot lane, because originally it was just 1 HOV lane, but they widened it to 2 lanes. So it was from the capacity expansion, and it was also from the influx of single-occupant toll-paying customers. That's where the majority of the increased person throughput came from. But because there was an increase in ridership, there was also a person throughput increase from transit. And the person throughput from transit did go up while person throughput from HOVs decreased. In fact, what we saw in the evaluation was that there was a drop in HOV 2s and 3s in the express lanes and a concurrent increase in HOV 2s in the general purpose lanes. So it looks like perhaps it's because there's a requirement to be a registered HOV 3+. It's possible that some of those previous HOVs may have switched over to using the general purpose lanes. The fourth hypothesis, which was really a question, asked what was the contribution of the individual UPA elements to increase ridership. In the case of Miami, what we were asking was what was the contribution of the hot lanes and the added bus service to increase ridership. And that information is gleaned mostly from the onboard transit surveys. In the surveys, 53% of new express bus riders said that the express lanes did influence their decision to use transit. And when I say new riders, what we're saying is riders that only began riding the bus sometime after Phase 1A. Of those same new riders, 38% said they used to drive alone. Another 34% said they had switched from Tri-Rail and or Metrorail. The reason for this latter figure, the 34%, is that if you're going to downtown Miami, if you take Tri-Rail, it requires a transfer to Metrorail to get downtown. But if you take the 95 Express bus, it's a direct trip. The evaluations on board surveys were done at 3 times. May 2008 was the pre-deployment survey. May 2009 was done after Phase 1A, and then May of 2010 was done after Phase 1B. And results showed that there were statistically significant improvements in riders' perceptions of travel time, reliability, and seat availability. The perception that had the greatest improvement was travel time. Over 80% of riders indicated time savings due to the express lanes. Here's a slide on the demographics of the 95 Express bus riders. 75% are between the ages of 35 and 64. And that age demographic pretty much stayed the same throughout the entire evaluation. That age bracket, 95 Express bus riders tend to be older than your typical rider on Miami-Dade Transit system-wide. So that demographic pretty much stayed the same, but there were some shifts over the course of the evaluation, particularly in gender, ethnicity, and income. At the beginning of the evaluation, your typical 95 Express bus rider was an African-American female with an annual household income of $60,000 or more. That had shifted. By 2010, we were seeing more male riders and more white riders, and the average annual household income went up even more. It went from 35% to 46% of riders. The vast majority of riders on the 95 Express bus have access to a vehicle always or most of the time. So these are choice riders. So what can we conclude? We can conclude from the Miami UPA that the 95 Express bus has benefited from the project, particularly in the areas of travel times and on-time performance. It's attracted choice riders, and it's increased ridership despite the rising unemployment. We can also conclude that the decreases in transit mode share and average vehicle occupancy were due largely to the increase in SOV traffic in the express lanes. Transit did contribute to increased person throughput in the express lanes, even as HOV throughput went down. And the surveys show that the UPA project did indeed influence some people's decisions to take transit. Next, I'm going to talk about what we've seen so far in Minnesota with a caveat. Unlike Miami, where we've had a chance to look over the results in detail and write the final Phase 1 report, with Minnesota, what I'll be showing you are the preliminary results. What we've yet to do at this point is examine in depth why the numbers are the way they are. That's going to take some more time, but I at least wanted to show you what we've seen so far. Let's start with the first hypothesis, which has to do with transit performance. In downtown Minneapolis, there's those contraflow bus-only lanes on Marquette and 2nd Avenue, known colloquially as the Mark II lanes. Now, prior to the UPA, it was a single bus lane on each avenue. The UPA project funded their expansion to 2 lanes on each avenue to allow for bus passing. The target speed for the project was 8 miles per hour. The 2008 data represents pre-deployment, and the 2010 and 2011 data is post-deployment. Although they have not hit the 8-mile-an-hour target yet, what this chart shows is there's definitely been some improvements in travel speeds across the board. Another measure of transit performance is on-time performance. This chart looks at the on-time, got ahead of myself. This is a chart on bus travel times and travel speeds. And here we're looking specifically at that northernmost segment, the price dynamic shoulder lanes, which opened in September of 2009. We looked at data at 3 different time points: April 2009, which was pre-deployment, and then April of 2010 and April of 2011, which was post-deployment. And unfortunately, it does show that there was an increase in travel times and a decrease in speeds. At this point, we don't know particularly what the reason is for that yet. That's something that we're going to have to look into. This is the same slide, but for that southern segment. Again, looking at travel times and travel speeds. In the northbound direction, which would be for the AM period, the speeds and the times got slightly worse. In the southbound direction, they stayed the same. But if you look at the speeds, I mean, overall, those are still pretty good speeds. Depending on what section of the highway you're in, the speed limit for the southern segment ranges between 55 and 65 miles an hour. So those are still pretty respectable speeds. Another measure of transit performance is on-time performance. This chart compares the AM peak period on-time performance for I-35 West and the 2 control corridors in the study, I-394 and I-94. What we see is that in the AM period, on-time performance in the control corridors stayed pretty much the same, but there was some slight degradation on I-35. Although, in the big scheme of things, their on-time performance was still, in general, good. It was still 85%. For the PM period, on-time performance stayed pretty much the same, but it's not that great. So now on-time performance can be a little tricky because on-time performance is a function of scheduling. I could design a route schedule to guarantee 100% on-time performance just by padding it with extra time. So that's why you have to look at on-time performance in conjunction with travel speeds and travel times. Now moving on to the second hypothesis, which pertains to riderships, the results are very positive. When we look at the corridor ridership, we see that I-35 West outperformed the two control corridors. In this chart, I just want to clarify something. When it says I-35 West North, what that's referring to is the portion of I-35 north of downtown. I-35 West South is referring to the segment of I-35 south of downtown. So routes on the I-35 corridor outperformed the two control corridors. And if you look at just those individual routes that were specifically funded by the UPA, with the exception of two routes, all of them have shown significant improvements in ridership. And this is looking at, we're comparing March 2010 to March 2011 data. We've done one onboard survey so far for I-35 West Express bus riders. That was done in June. We're going to do another one around September. And what the survey showed was that the vast majority of people on express buses on Interstate 35 are using it to get to work. 32% of them could be considered new riders, meaning that they began taking the bus less than a year ago, and 30% of them used to drive alone. Overall, riders are very happy with bus reliability and travel times. 91% rated it reliability is very good or good, and 85% rated it travel times is very good or good. This could be a reason why their perceptions haven't really changed much since the hot lanes were implemented, because the vast majority of them says it was very good or good, and then if you look at the bottom bullets, roughly half of them say that reliability and travel times are the same. Probably what this means is that people viewed the transit service as good then, and they view it as good still today. In the surveys, we also asked riders about the real-time travel signs on I-35 West and the next bus arrival signs in downtown. And what we found was that most of the riders said they've seen the signs. Slightly less on I-35, although I think the reason why that was only 66% was because not all of the signs were in place at the time of the survey. But in general, most riders have seen the signs, but only a small percentage were influenced to take transit by them. And I think perhaps what this shows is that these signs, they're an extra benefit. People like them, but it's not the deal maker for them. That by itself is not what's going to make them switch to transit. Good service is what's going to make them switch to transit. They were also asked about their perceptions of how have speeds and reliability changed since the Mark II lanes were put in place downtown. And roughly half said that the service speeds and reliability was better now. And that jives with the quantitative data that I discussed earlier. Here's a look at the last two slides I want to show you pertain to rider demographics. Now, there are differences between the average rider on the I-35 express routes and the average rider on Metro buses system-wide. Riders on the I-35 West express routes tend to be older. By older, I mean over 35. They tend to be whiter and predominantly female. Riders on I-35 West routes tend to have higher annual household incomes and greater access to personal vehicles. And just out of curiosity, I wanted to compare the demographics of the riders in Minneapolis to the riders in Miami. So what you see on the left, that's the demographics that you just saw for the Minneapolis riders on I-35, and the column on the right are the demographics I showed earlier in the presentation for I-95 riders. And with the exception of ethnicity, there's remarkable similarities between the demographics of the express bus riders in these two cities. And I would expect that there would be differences in ethnicities because, after all, Miami is not Minneapolis. But other than that, they tend to be mostly females. Their incomes tend to be higher, and most of them have access to at least one car. Now, I don't have a conclusion presentation for Minnesota because, as I said, these are tentative results at this point. We haven't been able to conclude anything definitively at this point. We're still working on a report. But this is my contact information and the contact information of my assistant if you want to contact me or him if you have any questions about the UPA projects. And I guess at this point I want to hand it back over to Jen, and it looks like we've got some time for questions.
Yes, Brian, thank you very much for the presentation. We do have a question coming in. Someone would like to know basically regarding the 95X bus riders. This person would like to ask the income demographic profile of 95X bus riders. Is this simply a descriptive statistics analysis, or is there a correlation of increased use with these parameters? And then a second part of the question they ask is, for Minneapolis, to what extent does the degradation in travel time for buses account for construction in the middle of the corridor?
Okay, let me tackle the first question first. And as the demographics that we're showing for income is just that. And I guess is the question, was this person asking, was there anything about the UPH project that caused higher income people to be influenced to take the bus?
Let me just repeat the question here.
Okay.
The income demographic profile of 95X bus riders. Is this simply a descriptive statistics analysis, or is there a correlation of increased use with these parameters?
I mean, I just probably would just say this is just a descriptive statistic.
Okay, and then I'm sorry.
And what was the second question about Minneapolis?
Yes, for Minneapolis, to what extent does the degradation in travel time for buses account for construction in the middle of the corridor?
That's something that we still need to dig into, because in this presentation I was able to show you the travel times and speeds for the northern and southern segment. What we're going to do next is we're going to look at that middle segment, which is called the Crosstown Commons segment. And from what I understand, that is where most of the congestion occurs. So once I've got that data, I'll be curious to see if that could be the cause for on-time performance not being that great.
Okay, we also do have another question. This question says, you noted that the 6 cities added bus service, citing the number of additional vehicles. Was the new funding for transit strictly for capital expenditures, like vehicles? How are the operational costs of these new bus services supported?
Okay. In all the sites, the federal money was for capital expenses. The only UPA/CRD site that I know of that is using toll revenues to pay for operational expenses is Miami. I'm not aware of how the other areas are covering their operational expenses at this point.
Okay, we also have a question that asks, when you referred to the change in scheduled travel times, did that lead to any cost savings? And if so, is there data such as percentage change?
That was not something that we looked at. So.
Okay, we have another question. How were the ridership and bus speed data, how were they collected, and who did it?
Okay, I take it you're probably referring to Minneapolis. What the transit agencies in Minneapolis did was they were able to, they gave us travel, we determined a segment of the highway with a start and end point, and it was a set distance. And we had the transit agencies send us, well, how much time in minutes did it take for all the buses in the corridor to traverse that distance. And then we did a backwards calculation to get the speed from that. In Miami, it was pretty much done the same way.
Okay, we have another question that asks, for the Miami slide regarding average vehicle occupancy, what does that represent and how does one measure it?
Average vehicle occupancy is measured by basically someone goes out and basically stands on top of an overpass, and as the vehicles go by, they're counting the number of vehicles, but they're also categorizing them by single occupant, cars with 2 or 3 plus passengers in it. And then we get the transit ridership from the transit agency, and we know how many transit vehicles passed along that segment in the same time period, and from that we're able to calculate AVO.
Okay, another question asks, regarding the average speeds on the I-35 West before and after the UPA, did this take into account the variable speed limits that are now along the corridor?
No, it did not.
Okay.
And that's what I'm glad this person brought that up. That's something I should make note of to go back when we dig in further.
Okay, someone else asks, seems to me these parameters would have to be interrelated significantly in a statistical model. Males earn more than females as a general rule. Whites earn more than African Americans, etc. Am I right here? This person asks.
Can you say that again one more time?
Seems to me these parameters would have to be interrelated significantly in a statistical model. Males earn more than females, whites earn more than African Americans, etc. Am I right here?
I mean, it's possible that, yes, there is a correlation between the two. I don't know if we were so much interested in that in the evaluation. I think what stood out more to me about the demographics was that you always hear the myth that higher income people will never take a bus, that they will only take a train. And I think these demographics on income shatter that myth.
Okay, we also have a question that asks whether in any of the UPA projects you've discussed, will toll revenues be used to fund transit service?
Yeah, I think I had mentioned that before. As far as I know, Miami is the only one that's doing that.
Okay, another question we have. Has there or will there be any assessment on the impact of HOV2 carpools?
If you're talking specifically about Miami, I do believe, we're not doing it, but I believe FDOT's other consultant is or will be doing an analysis of that. Here at Cutter, we're only doing the transit component of the evaluation for the different UPA sites.
Okay, we have another question. Would you say that the Miami Express lanes disadvantaged HOV ridership to an extent? I ask because this was a key acceptability issue in Minneapolis.
I think, and let me caveat that this time. This is just my hunch. I don't have anything quantitative to back it up other than just a little bit that I saw with the changes in person throughput. Yeah, I mentioned, I think earlier, that we saw decreases in HOV2s and 3s in the express lanes and an increase in HOV2s in the general purpose lanes. Remember, in Miami, it's not just that you have to be an HOV3, you have to be a registered HOV3. When I saw that data, it kind of gave me a suspicion that I wonder if making people go through that hoop of registering has made it so that they figure, well, I'll either just switch to the general purpose lanes or I'll just get a transponder and drive by myself. But that's a hunch. I don't have anything to back it up other than what I saw in the person throughput tables.
Okay, I think someone is asking for a little bit more clarification here. They ask, So who collected ridership data and how?
The ridership data was all provided to us by the transit agencies. That's not just with Miami, but in all the sites, all of the data collection is done by the transit agencies, and they send us the data. We analyze it.
Okay, we have another question that asks, for the Miami UPA, you mentioned that average vehicle occupancy went down and transit mode share went down. Did you expect this to happen?
No, I don't think. I think initially the hope was that it would go up. In retrospect, though, I'm starting to wonder if this is something that we're going to see with HOV to HOT conversions, that even if ridership goes up, you're going to have such a large influx of people using the lane that are paying with transponders that the AVO is going to go down. So I think this is something that we're going to want to keep an eye out for in the other sites as we do the other evaluations. And coincidentally, for Minneapolis, and in all the sites, they're also going to be doing not just a transit analysis, but they're going to be doing a traffic analysis as well. And so we'll be looking at how AVO has changed in these other sites also.
Okay, we have another question that asks, could you repeat what you just explained about why AVO might be expected to go down?
Well, AVO is a function of how many people are in the vehicle. When it's an HOV lane, the only people that should be in that lane are 2+ or 3+ vehicles. Once you convert it to an HOT lane and allow single occupant vehicles in all likelihood, you're going to have such a large influx of single occupant vehicles that your AVO is going to go down. Hopefully that explains it a little better.
Okay, we have another question. For the Miami UPA, you mentioned that the transit signal priority resulted in a 12% reduction in bus travel times. How many minutes was that?
That was about a 4-minute reduction in travel times, and that was the distance over which that 4-minute savings occurred was about 10 miles. In the PM period, we didn't really see much change. My guess on that is that it could be that traffic flows in the evening are so heavy that even the TSP doesn't help. Because after all, it doesn't matter if you get an early green with a TSP if the bus is, stuck behind 20 cars.
Okay, we also have someone who asks, did the Miami example take into account that there was only one HOV lane prior to the UPA, and that the road was restriped to provide an additional lane to be converted to HOT?
Yes, in our evaluation, we did make note of that and I think I covered this in the presentation when I said there was a 42% increase in throughput. Some of that is due to the addition of an extra lane. So yes, that was accounted for.
Okay, another person asks, unlike the Miami UPA, bus on-time performance for the Minnesota UPA doesn't appear to have gotten any better. Can you think of any reason why this would be?
Well, I think one, and I don't have my slide in front of me, but I think one of the difference between Miami and Minneapolis was that I think conditions in Miami were much worse pre-deployment, and so there was a lot more room for improvement. I think perhaps in Minneapolis, the facility was working generally good as an HOV lane, and there wasn't that much room left to improve, at least in one of the directions. I think in the evening, the on-time performance still isn't that great. And that part I'll have to dig in. But from what I recall, I think the AM on-time performance was fairly decent. It just didn't really improve much.
Okay, we have someone else who's asking, is there a way to isolate the impacts on transit ridership of ITS technologies, such as traveler information, and the price-related impacts of tolling on the lanes?
I think generally the way you're going to get that level of detail is through the onboard surveys, specifically asking them, did this particular ITS technology influence your decision to take the bus?
Okay, yes. Well, the second portion of that question asks, how did you do this in your evaluation?
Well, in the evaluation, like I think I mentioned with Minneapolis, we specifically asked them if they had seen the real-time travel signs and the next bus arrival signs in downtown. So we asked them, did you see it? And then we also asked the follow-up question, did it influence you to take the bus?
Okay, we have another person who asks, what are the various UPA sites doing to address the issue of equity?
Okay. It varies from location to location. Like I said, in Miami, a portion of the toll revenues are used to pay for operational expenses of the 95 Express bus. In Seattle, they'll be offering different pay options for the tolls. Most of the toll customers in Seattle will be using what's called a good-to-go transponder, which is a prepaid account. However, they will also be offering a pay-by-plate option where you don't need to establish a prepaid account and buy a transponder. The cameras will simply snap a shot of your license plate and send you a bill. The Seattle UPA project is also going to include outreach efforts that focus on limited English-speaking populations. In terms of how equity is being addressed in the evaluation, the Battelle Institute, that's the group that's conducting the national evaluation on behalf of US DOT. Cutter, where I work, we're a sub to Battelle. We're doing the transit component. But Battelle's evaluation is going to include an equity analysis. That analysis will include surveys of carpoolers, transit users, and transponder users, asking them questions pertaining to perceptions of fairness.
We have another question that asks, were there any fare changes, such as discounts or time-of-day fare pricing, on transit in the UPA sites that might have contributed to increased ridership?
To the best of my knowledge, there were no. In other words, I think what they're asking, like, you did dynamic pricing with the tolls. Was there any sort of variable pricing with the transit fares? To the best of my knowledge, no. And I don't think anyone has planned to do that.
Okay, we have another question. Has there been any introduction of or increase in slugging or casual carpooling?
That's something that we're going to try and observe in Atlanta. With Miami and Minneapolis, that was not part of the evaluation. But I guess there has been some evidence of slugging already on Interstate 85 in Atlanta. And so that's something that unofficially, at least, we'll be keeping an eye on as part of that evaluation.
We do have a participant who would like to know whether you will be posting any of the survey tools used, possibly online through Cutter.
Well, if you mean by survey tools, the questionnaires that we used, the questionnaires are posted online already from Miami. They're in the, if you go to the National Bus Rapid Transit Institute's webpage, and that's nbrti.org, and you go to research, you'll see the Miami Phase 1 report posted. At the back of that report are the questionnaires that we used. I don't have the other survey instruments yet because the reports have not been written. The Miami one's the only one that's had an actual final report published so far. But all the questionnaires, with some variation, 95% of the questionnaire is going to be the same in each of the UPA sites because we want it to be consistent with the questions so that we can compare across sites. So if you look at the Miami survey instrument that's at the back of that document, that'll give you a good indication of what we're asking across the board.
Okay, we also have someone asking whether this presentation will be made available later on, and I just wanted to remind them that yes, this webcast is being recorded. So if you've missed any part of it or if you'd like to review it, it will be available for download on our website probably sometime next week, just to let that person know. And then we have another question that asks, was crash data evaluated to see if there was an increase in accidents or fatalities?
I believe it's not part of our transit analysis, but I believe in the other reports that Battelle is going to do, I think in the traffic report, and I think they're doing a safety analysis as well, that information will be looked at.
Okay, we have someone here who has offered a comment, which I'll go ahead and read since there are no other questions at this time. This person says, Minnesota uses a portion of toll revenues to pay for transit operations. In terms of the drop in AVO, keep in mind that Miami added capacity. Not all HOT lanes added capacity. That has an impact on AVO. In other existing HOT lanes, but not UPA or CRD lanes, AVO has actually increased. Also, the registered carpool process is unique in that families cannot be considered carpools.
I need to go back, his comment about AVO and that we added 2 lanes. I'd have to go back and look at the methodology we used in the Miami report, but I believe the AVO figures we reported were just for 1 lane because we wanted to be consistent from pre-deployment to post-deployment. I'd have to go back and look at that. But it's still a good point. And thank you, whoever that was, for the clarification. I did not realize the toll revenues are being used in Minneapolis for bus service. So that's good to know.
Okay, at this time, we don't have any other questions coming in. And it looks like we're finishing up right about on time at 1 o'clock anyway. So I think that's going to wrap it up for today. However, I would just like to remind everyone once again, if you would like to, please, this presentation will be available for download from our website. And if you have any further questions that occur to you later on that you'd like to follow up with Brian about, please feel free to do that as well. So yes, thanks to all of you for attending today's webcast. I would like to remind all of you that our next webcast will be on June 16th, and the topic will be moving the bus safely back into traffic, which will be presented by Pei Sung Lin and Aldo Fabregas. If you could, we'd like to ask you to please take a moment before you log off to complete the evaluation form for this seminar, just to help us get feedback on how informative these webcasts are to you. So with that, once again, on behalf of Cutter and Brian Pissarro, I would like to thank all of you for your attendance, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.